I can shut this a little. I know it's a little that time of the day. Is that a little better? So it's not in your face. It might keep ticking, but okay. So these are just.
Are they on? Do they?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear us all over the. Could you hear us without the microphones?
Oh, okay.
Oh no.
Okay, now I can hear it. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, as a good librarian, we're going to start out by saying what this is for perpetuity here. So this is the first of the 3 speaker series associated with the Vandal Traditions exhibits, and today is, oh boy, September 28th, 2017. My name is Erin Stoddart, and I'm the head of Special Collections and Archives at the University of Idaho.
And my name's Kathy Barnard. I am a proud 1981 alumna of the University of Idaho, and right now I'm the Assistant Vice President for Alumni Relations and Advancement Communications, which fits on both sides of my business card. So way too long.
So I will say I am not an alum, nor am I from here, so it's always interesting to work at a university and learn about traditions and see how they compare to other places that you've lived or spent your time. Kathy and I have a good one coming up that the phrase here meant something completely different than where I went to school in Madison. So it's kind of fun to always explore those traditions.
And it's fun to see the traditions I know pretty well through someone else's eyes. So anyway, so we started by thinking about what really does make a tradition. I mean, a tradition could be, and you'll see in the slides that we've got to share, they can be just really random and goofy. But I think if you had to come up with an equation or a formula for what a tradition really is it's a shared experience, some sort of activity or place or person that more than one other individual experienced, plus longevity. I think that's also a really important factor in what making a tradition. It has to last over some time. You know, one occurrence a tradition does not make. Multiple occurrence makes a tradition. And then the longer it becomes, the longer it's in practice, the more embedded it becomes in the organization, to the point where it really does become part of the fabric of the institution. At the University of Idaho, the traditions are really the difference between being an individual Vandal and being part of a Vandal family. It's really been interesting in the position. I've only been in this position for about 1.5 years, but the commonality of story that I hear, and I literally have visited with hundreds of alumni over the last 1.5 years. The commonality of story is amazing and actually quite powerful because it spans generations. It spans, hey, welcome folks. It spans gender. It spans geographic areas. It expands ethnic differences. So there's really something powerful about that shared experience and longevity. It's also amazing to me what gets passed on and what doesn't get passed on. And so tonight we're going to look at some long-standing traditions. We're going to look at some generational traditions, those that kind of came in, were really popular, and then kind of faded out. We're going to look at some new traditions. We're going to look at some traditions that are based on place, because there are really some iconic places. And really, that last bullet refers to, for many people, the entire University of Idaho campus in Moscow. And that's another conversation we can have as we go a little further in the conversation. But those who went to school in Moscow, for them, the campus itself is a tradition.
So just to talk a little bit about how do we try to, attempt to capture traditions in our archives. So how do we start to know about these traditions? Well, it can come through in a number of different ways. A lot of these times we get information in 2 main different ways. We get it through what we call like university transfers of records. So those would be things that are coming from different departments, capturing student life, different types of university publications, kind of the official record of the university. We get those through our relationships on campus. And then we also kind of get a lot of our information from individual or family or organizational donations. And so those donations can come in the form of money to help process and maintain collections over time, but it's also trying to provide people with that information. What was it like to be a Vandal here? What was your personal experience? What was your family's experience here? And not because we don't just collect for the university, we collect for the state and the region. It's also what is it like to be a minor and other things. But for today, we'll focus on the university. So thinking about those donations coming through these different primary sources. So can you donate photographs or maps of campus, different student organizations, what were you doing on campus? Different types of oral histories and scrapbooks were really, really popular at a certain time. So kind of getting all these different types of primary sources is a way for us to document and kind of make that an official tradition. We can start to see how those things are occurring over time, over decades, over generations. Another way to get that information is when other people are kind of writing about those things or talking about those things like today. So a good example of that are like things like our campus history books. We'll put in a shameless plug for the book that Kathy Aiken and I worked in last year, which is out on the table. But that's a really good demonstration of using all these different primary sources to tell a story, although you were not the one who lived through it. Although Kathy Aiken did, so she probably wouldn't like me saying that. And I think just a good point I'll touch on now, but I think if we think about it over the course of the lecture tonight and talk about it a little at the end, kind of the absence of this documentation makes things like talking about traditions really difficult. If we don't receive different types of donations, if we're not getting those materials in, whether they're born digital and they're on Facebook pages at this point, or they're student scrapbooks from 100 years ago, that's really hard for us to then be able to document that type of history. So just kind of thinking about what we're talking about today, we do have some form of evidence, but also thinking about what does an absence say and who's not being represented in your archives or in these different types of stories or traditions. So just kind of leave that as food for thought for the moment.
I want to piggyback on something Erin said, though, about the way things come in. So a lot of people send those, their old yearbooks or their photographs that they don't have identification for, or they do, or the dance cards that their aunt had from, back in the 20s. So they come into our office in all sorts of forms. This last week, from someone really no one knows, from New York, sent us every single menu card from the 1930, what was it, 1931?
38 through 37, 38.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner menus for Hayes Hall Women's Dormitory. Every single day, every single week. It's amazing. And I like to cook, so I was looking through there, and I can tell you in 1938 they ate a lot of canned peas and gingerbread. So it was a really interesting gift that we got from. And did you have any luck finding them?
I was out of town, so I haven't tried yet. But yeah, we have just it came in the mail, so a last name that we'll try to send a letter in the mail asking for additional information, or at least your first name, so we can thank you properly.
All it was a little sticky note on that pile that says, "Found these, thought you'd like them."
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I do like them, but it would be nice if there was a little more information.
So feel free to pass those around. So.
Yeah, they're fascinating. I just think of the work that went in.
That's the newest accession is.
Yeah, I just think of the work that went into that. Oh, wrong way. So these are the long-standing traditions. These are the ones that no matter what age of Vandal you speak with, they will mention them. It spans generation, whether it's in the same family or not. So, there are fifth-generation Vandals. I mean, the DNA runs deep in this institution. But even in the families that don't have 5 generations or don't have anyone, they're first generation, they still understand and know these traditions. So really, they evolve over time. They don't look the same today, exactly the same today as they did when they were originated, but still the essence of the tradition is still there. And really, it just has become part of the institutional DNA. And I don't know about neocortical memory and all of that stuff, but it does. It's very, very deep. So homecoming, we're coming up on homecoming next week. I spent 3.5 hours last night interviewing homecoming royalty, something I would never thought I would have done in my professional career, but it was fascinating. And those traditions go back way, way back to the origin of the institution, almost really into the late 1900s or late 1800s, early 1900s, and they don't look that much different. There's a serpentine. They walk through campus. We start up at the golf course. We start with the marching band, and they lead us down New Greek Row. Everyone comes out. They join us. They go down Old Greek Row. Everyone joins us. We go down the Residence Hall Row. Everyone joins us. So by the time we get to the Kibbe Dome, where the bonfire is, there literally are thousands of people marching together, singing the fight song, and then we have a big bonfire, which is very tribal. I had never been to that big of a bonfire before, but they light it, whoo, everything goes up. It's actually quite dramatic. And then there's a pep rally. They crown the royalty and sing the fight song. Everyone goes home happy. Next morning, homecoming parade. And that's ebbed and flowed over the years. But I think it's coming back as a tradition, a family-friendly tradition that Vandals of all ages can enjoy. I'll be there October 7th is the homecoming parade, and I will see people from all over the country who really do take the homecoming very literally. They come from all over, they regather, they reconnect with the people that they loved, the places that they loved. So it becomes very special for everybody. And then there's the football game. Now, I can tell you I've watched more football games in this job than I ever did when I was a student. Part of it is, in my job description, but you have to have tough skin and be of good character to be a Vandal. So hopefully, because over the years, it too has ebbed and flowed, football success. The I-bench. This was created, it was built in the 1920s, and originally it was for seniors. Only seniors could sit on the I-bench. They would gather there and sing, practice the cheers and the fight songs that they were going to perform at the game. And if you were a freshman and you got caught sitting on the I-bench, right around the front, not this side, right here, on this, around the corner of the administration building, there used to be a fountain. If you got caught sitting on the I-bench, into the fountain you went, unless you were a senior.
It's that circular.
You're right.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's where the fountain was. So into the fountain you would go. I've also learned from the alumni that I visited, there's also a whole generations where that's where they had their first kiss. That's where their sweetheart proposed to them. So there are alumni couples who, when they come back, they go to the I-bench first, and then they go visit the children they have at the institution. So here's a question for all of us to think about, because I think it's really important, and it's going to become more of a question, I think. The I-bench is in really disrepair. It's crumbling on one end, and someone tried to repair it, didn't do a great job. So I want to just think a little bit about, do we take all measures to restore it to its original state? Do we let it be and try to preserve it? Do we let it crumble into dust? It's a big question, and I don't think the institution really has an answer right now about what they're going to do with places like and objects like the I-bench. I-mums. This is another homecoming tradition. Started in the early 1920s. Big, beautiful yellow chrysanthemum with a sparkly eye on it. It's what you bought your mother or your sweetheart to go to the homecoming parade in. It started, actually, in other special occasions too, but it started with Scott's flowers. But, Scott, over the years, decided he wanted to retire. So what happens when Scott retires and this tradition is in his hands? Luckily, they're now being offered by a new vendor, Little Shop of Florals. So the tradition continues, but it's an example of how tenuous some of those, one person, one business made a difference in that case. Freshman beanies and the aforementioned fountain. So you saw in the display cases a couple of examples of the beanies that freshmen were required to wear. It was in the class manual, and
oh yeah, so they're small and green, as you could see, and freshman men were forced, they had to wear them. They were allowed to take them off for athletic events, and then they had to wear a rooter cap, which is also in the display, so you can see that. But yeah, they had to wear them. They were forced to do that. That obviously made you very identifiable on campus, which I think was definitely part of the purpose. That can be used for positive things or negative things. And so I think a lot of the things that we would probably think about, what kind of circumvented that, might borderline hazing and that type of behavior. And obviously that is something that's changed in a lot of ways in people's views on that type of behavior. But very common occurrence would be to dunk freshmen, especially, in that fountain. So now, as you can see on the photo on the right, it's a flower bed that's out in front of the administration building, which is very pretty. But it used to have, that photograph has a picture of the Cupid statue. And then after that was stolen, I believe it was replaced with a seahorse statue. And then that was stolen. And then both the tradition with that, I believe it phased out kind of in the late 30s. So it's been a while since the fountain was actually there. But those memories are still definitely around, and we certainly have photographic evidence of these behaviors on campus.
And I'm sure the people who got dunked at the time didn't think it was such a great thing. But if you talk to alumni now who were dunked, there are very few of them. It's kind of a badge of honor, a very big badge of honor that they got dunked in the fountain. The loser's walk. So Bill McGowan, I don't know if you can see him. Is there a pointer on this thing? Bill McGowan, he's the one holding the lost sign. Him, right there. Bill McGowan was an Argonaut reporter who popped off in the newspaper and said, "We'll bet you that if you win the football game, we'll walk to Pullman, and if we win the football game, you'll walk from Pullman to Moscow." Well, it was 1954 before we got a chance to walk to Pullman. Not only did you have to walk the 8 miles there, and it was usually in not a wonderful time of year, but when you got there, you had to wash the feet of the students who were waiting for you. So it was adding insult to injury. It was a double whammy. But that tradition lasted well into the late, I think 1969 was the last time that it did. The only time that they walked from Pullman to Moscow was 1954. So that's a long tradition, long tradition. I think we could say that Vandals would be in better shape than Cougars as a result of that tradition, but I don't know if that's true or not.
I just think it's interesting, not being from here, to think about all these folks walking down, now the highway, and just what a scene that must have been. I just think that's really amusing. And then there's definitely photographs in our archives that are probably what I would consider kind of, I don't know if promotional is the right, but kind of, poking fun at it. So you have the young man reading his book as he's walking as if he doesn't care, things like that. But definitely an interesting tradition.
Bill McGowan came back to campus in the 1980s and donated his time for a lot of different purposes. So he was a true silver and gold Vandal to his bones. He probably felt bad about starting that tradition in the first place. So.
He might have thought it.
We talked a lot about the places on campus that are become traditions or become part of the institutional DNA. And really, I've traveled to a lot of different campuses. I'm sure many of you have traveled a lot of different places. And there is something quite special about the Moscow campus. And when you talk to current students, as I did last night, and you ask, how did you come to University of Idaho? Many, many of them said, well, I applied to different schools, and then we went on a tour. And as soon as I got to Moscow, I knew that was the one. So I think there's something about the place that is special and has become iconic over the years. The Camperdown Elms. Those are the gnarly-looking trees in front of Reidenbaugh Hall and Nichols Hall. They are so beloved. If I go and visit with a group of alumni and don't in some passing way describe the health of the Camperdowns. Are they in full bud? Are they leafed out? Have they lost all their leaves? Has the gold started showing up? Because so many people traveled there, and because they're so distinctive, they really do stick with people. And so I've just now proactively decided I will mention the Camperdowns in every presentation that I make. I will tell you right now, they're in full leaf, but they're little stripes of gold that are starting to show up. So they're in a good way. When I first came back to the University of Idaho, after a tour at Washington State University, I was signing some paperwork. It was over Christmas break, and I had to walk from where the Alumni Lounge is in Hayes Hall to the administration building. I left, and it was really quiet, and then it started snowing. I'm like, oh, this is so beautiful. And I walked by the Camperdowns, and the Carillons started playing the alma mater. So I just had to take a moment and just soak all of that in. So the Camperdowns are very near and dear to my heart, and to many, many, many of the alumni that I work with.
I agree. I had never seen these trees before in my life, and they are stunning. I also like to just you can kind of duck under them. It's kind of fun to do. They are part of, they've been on campus a very long time, so they were part of plans, outside of these buildings, and so they have stuck around definitely into a century. So,
Hello Walk. Actually, this is a tradition on many land grant campuses. They usually have a moral hall. There's usually a Hello Walk. At Idaho, President Upham in the 1920s is the one who started that tradition, and it still stands today. So if you're walking on Hello Walk and you encounter someone, it's not okay to look at your feet. You need to say hello and keep going. Or hello and visit, but don't look at your shoes.
When I walk up and down it, you do walk around and you see, and I'm probably guilty of it sometimes too, students and faculty who have, your headphones in or whatever, but people will still, I will say, at least smile and look up and smile if they're not saying hello. So, and I think it's also, to me, just an interesting part about the stairs, how they come out. Just to me, that bridge between the city and the university, that it's not a wall, right? They are stairs that are meant to help connect that both, hopefully physically and, metaphorically, that we're trading ideas and trading things in town. So
we didn't have a photograph of the actual marble steps, but how many of you have been inside the administration building? Everyone, almost everyone. So if you're going from the first floor to the second floor, to the third floor, they're not pure marble. They're marble cast or cast, concrete to look like marble. But there are footsteps worn, and truly. So when you go up those stairs, if you stop and just pause a moment and think about the hundreds, thousands of students who have literally walked in those same steps, what they've done, why they came to the university, how they enjoyed their time there or not, what they went on to accomplish after they left. I mean, I get a little goosebump every time I go up those marble steps, because it reminds me that I'm part of something much, much bigger than myself and my own experience at the university.
Yeah, that's good.
The perch. So the perch is a little building right next it's right on Old Greek Row. It's right across from the Campus Christian Center and kind of nestled in there between fraternities. But not only for Greek Row, but for many other students, it became a place to go have a burger. You could buy beer there. For generations, it was a place to go play bridge instead of go to class. They sold ice cream, and for many years, Madge was the proprietor and chief character at the Perch, and she was brash. I knew Madge. She was loud and she was brash, and she had a heart of gold. And not every alumni, but many alumni will tell you stories about not having any money, and she'd slip them a $5 out of the cash register, or knowing that they were hungry and fix them a burger. So she's part of, even though she wasn't a Vandal, she's part of our lore, and she impacted lives. And she was so popular that she was named the Grand Marshal of the Homecoming Parade one year. And she was thrilled. She had her hair done. She put on a dress. She was just really, really happy to be included in that way. But that's a definite example of a person who, she didn't get her degree from Idaho. She didn't even attend classes there. But if you count the number of lives that she impacted from her little spot on the perch, she definitely had an impact.
And so not being here, I will say my two things about the perch are, one, when I first got here and Kathy, the other Kathy, and I were working on this, I thought it was really funny how she said one of the most things that stick out to me is that the ice cream was sold by pronoun. So whether it's politically correct to say this, so vanilla, if you wanted a vanilla cone, you'd ask for a she. If you wanted a chocolate cone, you'd ask for a he. And if you wanted a swirl cone, you'd ask for an it. So I was like, what?
Oh, dear.
That was hilarious. And then we moved here 3 years ago, and not before I was not an archivist here yet. And I remember going down 6th Street and seeing a sign for Perch 2. I'm like, what is that? And so I didn't even know what Perch 1 was yet. But the idea that, that this actually had meaning in the community and that they were actually trying to, recreate something that it fizzled out, I think, within the first year we lived here. But
well, it was in a strip mall.
That doesn't help. But yeah, just interesting how you also some people try to take a tradition and kind of manifest it into something else, and sometimes that might spin off and sometimes it might not.
So we talked about the long-standing traditions, and then there are traditions that are generational, that are only really last for 5 years, 10 years, whatever that looks like. And no surprise, right? The traditions of the 1930s look a lot different than the traditions of the late 1960s, early 1970s. So these are just some shots of, this is Blue Mountain. And we'll get to more detail about that in just a second. But these are some of those generational traditions. So the Blue Mountain Music Festival, it was one of the largest and I think one of the longest running outdoor music festivals on a college campus in the entire United States. Where the old Arboretum is now, there's the health education building, the KUID building, the admin building, and education. That bowl there is where the concert would happen. And literally thousands of students would gather. The bands would, I think it was at least a day long, if not a two-day long festival. It was the 60s, so if you remember it, you probably weren't there. And it was ended because of risk management issues. Lots of pot smoke in the air, lots of alcohol, but a very, very popular event for that generation of students. They remember it well and fondly. And a lot of them participated in helping to put it on.
So when I was just kind of looking some of this up, it was organized. So it's just interesting. I can still see some things that resonate today still. So this was organized in 1971 as a fundraiser for the ACLU. So just thinking about current times. And then the second year, that was really dedicated to the students who had died at Kent State University. So really putting it, obviously, in its times. And I found that the highest number of participation was in 1974 with over 10,000 students there, which to me, trying to imagine 10,000 people standing in that spot really is, that's awesome. So.
Well, in some pictures, if you look at it was like 2 levels because there were people on people's shoulders, so it might have been just 5,000 people with people on their shoulders. I think that might be how they fit in.
That's awesome.
The Galt Hall Streaking Society is another generational tradition. Galt Hall, which is no longer on campus, but was a long-standing dormitory for men. They, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, created the Streaking Society. They completed the longest vertical streak in history by what? First and longest vertical streak by streaking the Theophilus Tower. They put on their ski masks, their tennis shoes, and their smiles, and they went to up the elevator and up, streak,
way.
down, streak, down, streak, down, streak. How they didn't get caught on any one of those floors is amazing to me. Boxes have been strategically placed in these photographs.
Just in case.
If you want to take another look and see if you know any of these people, we can talk after. We can talk afterwards. Yes, Tina.
That's the last time I saw them streaking. They had actually gone just to sunglasses. They didn't care about masks.
Well, it's cold. It's cold here, so.
What I thought was the best part when we were looking at this, and these are actually both photographs from the yearbook, so kind of talking about how are things documented and where are you finding them. So I'm not saying that there's no streaking photos in the archives. However, this is how we had to kind of turn to this to talk about this. And to me, I love that the women are on the sidelines with the numbers. That to me, that was the best part of this.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see in that slide. That's what they're doing is they're holding up. Yeah, Tom.
Can I give you a footnote?
Yeah.
Please.
It's the Galt Hall Streaking Association, Galt, GHSA.
Galt Hall streaking.
And Galt Hall also had the first co-ed streak team. And it
Oh,
started
really?
in January of 1974.
That's fascinating. How do you know that?
I was the first.
We'd like to have your records, please.
75 pounds.
Anyway, a classic example of a tradition that actually hit its peak, so to speak, when in the span of just a very short, few short years. I think it lasted into the early 1980s
Yeah.
and then fizzled.
Yep.
The Mardi Gras parade. Now, we still have a Mardi Gras celebration, and I don't even know if we still have a parade. But for many years, the Mardi Gras parade was a place to highlight some amazing sculptures that were made out of milk carton material, paper, from potlatch paper down in Lewiston for a class that art professor David Geese taught. And they were huge. You can see on the left, it would take multiple people to carry them, and they were so creative. I mean, some of them had moving parts, some of them had people along that would interact with it. So that was a tradition for several years, along with one of my favorites, the law school's briefcase brigade. They performed every Mardi Gras parade. They're in their underwear because they're briefs. They're in their briefs. They had their briefcases. They had their suits, their ties, their boots. Depending on the year, they always marched in formation. Depending on the year, the formations got much more complex than other times. One year, they all stopped, opened their briefcase, took out a shark fin, and put it on their back and walked in formation. So the creativity that went into the Mardi Gras parade was really quite amazing. There was also a community-wide kazoo band, and I don't know if any of you remember that. It was a wonderful, delightful way to break up February, and it usually came just before or just after the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival. So there were a couple of bright spots in the dark winter there.
Footnote?
Yes?
Please.
Okay, Mardi Gras parade. Giant sculpture of a blender, and Joe Vandal in the blender, like getting chewed up. And the title was, because this is tradition, right? Where tradition meets the blender.
Oh my God.
See,
Oh, I've
it
gotta
was
find that.
awesome. It's just awesome stuff that came out of that. I don't
Interesting.
know the details for sure, but I think the tradition of the paper sculptures stopped when someone decided it was a fire hazard to store them all in, was at the dome, wasn't it? At the Kid Dome. Yeah. Some people had just, whatever.
Steve.
Yeah.
One thing about the parade, in the early days, the city wouldn't grant them a permit to go down Main Street, so they went down the alleys.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Now that I did not know.
Oh, that is good to know. I didn't know that.
Where there's a will, there's a way. They couldn't fight it very much longer because then they opened up Main Street.
And Madge from the Perch led the first kazoo bands.
Oh.
Several years.
See, icon. She's just an icon.
Yeah.
I was in the parade. That's just what it My friend went as a box of powder milk biscuits from the Prairie Home Companion.
Oh, very nice. Excellent.
She had, flowers she would leak as she walked up.
wish that was still like that.
It was amazing. So the snowball fight, it actually was spanned several generations, but boy, did the nature of it change. When it first started in the 1930s and before, it was a friendly little encounter between Greek houses. They'd toss a few snowballs, shake hands, go back to their respective houses or to each other's houses and drink. But by the 1960s, 70s, 80s, it turned violent because it was turned into a Greek versus non-Greek encounter, usually on the lawn toward the near the residence halls outside of Theophilus Tower, to the point where people got hurt, people got arrested. It wasn't just a snowball; it was a snowball with a big rock in it, and
golf balls and
turned ugly. So that was a tradition that is probably, we're better off without it. So new traditions, and you wonder, okay, so what does this new generation, what will they come up with for traditions? Some of the traditions that the university has embraced recently really don't come from the students. They're more university established, and we'll go through some of those. But there's some. Vandal walk. So this is one relatively new one. This came into being while I was at WSU, so it's been in the last 5 years that this has happened. But the Sunday before classes start in the fall, freshmen gather in the afternoon in the Kibbe Dome. They get their game day shirt from the Alumni Association. They learn the fight song. They take the class picture in the shape of a big eye on the Kibbe Dome floor. They meet Joe Vandal, and then the president and the marching band leads them from the Kibbe Dome to the administration building where they have a big barbecue. Great. Beautiful tradition. Really nice. The cool thing is, though, is that now, when they graduate, they gather on that same lawn and they walk to the dome. And the significance isn't lost on anyone. It's the start of a journey and the end of a journey. And it's a beautiful tradition. And the commencement lineup, if you haven't seen it, with the bagpipers and the balloons and families and the banners for the colleges, it really is quite wonderful. So the Vandal Walk is a relatively new tradition that I think is going to stick because people like it.
And it's so new. All these photos are not ours. They are from online. So because we can talk about the gap between the types of records we have now and then we wait, people wait. They usually turn those things over later in life and such, and so, or when we retire or leave. And so we have these gaps in our collections, right, where we haven't gotten the permanent historical materials. And so this is a great example of a tradition that's new enough on campus that is being celebrated consistently now, but it just hasn't really made its way over to us yet. Yeah.
I think this incorporates part of an old tradition as well, because there's a Vandal walk that used to go from the administration building down to Memorial.
Yes.
Okay.
I recall turning to one guy behind me and asked, how are you doing? He says, I don't know, so I'm going to make it or not. I got so drunk last night, my watch stopped.
No, but you are right. We definitely do have photographs of, students marching from admin down to Memorial Gym, and it makes sense that because it's not held there anymore, it's at the Kibbe Dome. Absolutely. That's a good point.
That's really good to know. That's like one of those evolution things, right? It's evolved into something new. So Cruise the World Day, this is another one that I think is a wonderful new tradition. As the university's student body has become more diverse, we have more students from all over the country and all over the planet. The celebration of international culture and customs and food and dress and dance has really expanded. It used to be a little bit here and a little bit here, but now Cruise the World Day is a big event. It fills the entire Vandal International Ballroom and then some, and lasts all day long. I think that's I think it's a good sign and a good indication that the traditions do follow and reflect the people who are at the university.
It's probably the best tasting day in Moscow.
It is. Oh, the smells kind of waft out of the Pittman Center. So campus absolutely has iconic places on it that people relate to and cherish. But the city of Moscow, and actually many students and alumni don't separate the two. You know, they think of Moscow as the University of Idaho or vice versa. So there are some places that are just for many, many, many generations of Vandals have become a part of the institution. Corner Club. I know alumni who will not come to Moscow without going to the club for a tub, and it is still the grimiest dive bar in town, and people still love it. It's, for some, as I said, it's a must stop. They won't leave Moscow without at least going in for a little bit. The Nobby Inn used to be one of the nice, was like the nice restaurant in town, right? That's where you went for that and the Mark IV. That's where you went on a Friday night for a steak or chops, a martini, and at the Nobby Inn, a little bowl of custard with a dollop of whipped cream on it. I waitressed there when I was in school, so I know of what I speak. But now the Breakfast Club, but both places are... alumni come back. At homecoming, you will see it'll be a 2-hour wait to get your breakfast. People love going back there. The ones who are as old as I am or maybe older remember when Nick was the bartender. Nick was about 8 feet tall and very stern. He had a crew cut, no sense of humor. As a waitress, you lived in dread of having to order a drink that had some whipped cream on it because really he only knew how to make whiskey and gin. That's all, the only thing he knew how to make. But it's an iconic place. And I love the different, I mean, think of Main Street today and then look at that picture on the left. I mean, just the change is amazing. Yeah. There's trees and the highway's not. Yeah, and it's not the highway barreling down the middle of town.
4 lanes with parking on both sides.
Oh, and then another thing, the Nobby Inn used to be where the city fathers would gather 9 o'clock sharp. They'd come from City Hall. They'd come from the businesses. They'd come from the sheriff's office. Gather. That was the brain trust for the city of Moscow, right there at the Nobby Inn.
Broken. They used to take their silver, coins, which was real silver, and they would dip them in a bath of mercury to shine them up real good and pass them out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
They evolved to be a rock tumbler.
That sounds much safer than a barrel of mercury.
You could tell you've been to the Nobby. You'd grab some change out of your pocket the next day at work. I've been to the Nobby.
That's funny.
Gambinos. So Gambinos started out as Alinos, and it was a little hole in the wall place with a patio. Yeah. But for many people, that's where you went to get really good pizza, hoagie sandwiches, and a fishbowl of beer. It was remodeled into this big place that it is now, but it's still a very, very popular place. They still serve pizza and beer, and students still like to go there.
So talking about comparative traditions, when Kathy and I were talking about this, and she said, "Oh, the fish bowls," and I was like, "Oh yeah, they do that too." And she's like, "Well, yeah, the beer," and I'm like, "Wait, a fish bowl of beer?" So I went to Madison, and so fish bowl is filled with booze, and I'm like, "Oh, it's just beer in your fish bowl? Oh, that's nothing."
Like a real
it's not
piper.
very healthy, but a very different term where I'm from. That means a very different type of tradition. But then I found the phone number ad today when I was looking around and just thought, I don't think people don't do this anymore, including myself, that you don't have that number memorized to get your late night fix of whatever you need. So Gambino's number 1.
I am pizza perfection.
And then, as we said, the future traditions. So here's some interesting things that came to mind when we were visiting. So many, many, many of these traditions are based on the Moscow campus, but increasingly, Vandals are going to school in Boise, in Coeur d'Alene, in Idaho Falls, or online. In the tour of the state that my boss and I did, we were in Sandpoint. We met a young woman who has never set foot on the Moscow campus and got her entire degree online and in Coeur d'Alene. And someone in the group said, "Oh my gosh, well, how do you feel like a Vandal?" And she was offended. She said, "Of course I'm a Vandal." She said, "The University of Idaho was there when I needed it, how I needed it. It was affordable and accessible. So of course I'm a Vandal." So that gives me hope. But I think as more and more and more students get their education in a non-traditional, not on a residential campus, it'll be interesting to see how or whether new traditions are created, how they're passed on. I think about right now a lot of current students, their world is their phone and their computer, and I just wonder, I was wondering how the heck are they going to have any sense of community? But you know what? What's happening tonight, or is it tomorrow night? It's an all-night gaming.
Oh, yeah.
All-night gaming festival where they'll sit next to each other and do their phones. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I think there is hope for the future in terms of future traditions. And humans, I think, in search of community, crave tradition, crave shared experience, and will always be creative in making sure that something pulls them together.
And I think just along those same lines, thinking about how are we, going back to the archives part, how are we documenting these changed traditions, or how will traditions look in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years even? And our newest archivist, Ashlyn, is actually in the audience too. And we've just started recently really starting to focus on collecting what we call born digital materials. So things that, they never originated on paper. So starting with things like the Argonauts or a student newspaper, and thinking about all the digital photographs that they have and all the editions that they have that are online. And everything from that to how do you document the student experience now? Those will be conversations that we'll be having about, organized groups, whether that's through social media or different ways of representing yourself and your life online. And how do we capture that so we can keep having these types of conversations in the future? It's definitely not going away anytime soon. And so it presents some real, what's a nice way to say it, challenges and opportunities with the profession about where's that going to go. So,
do you have any questions of us?
We obviously didn't cover all the traditions. I don't know if there's any that any of you experienced or your family experienced that you were surprised to not see here, or I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I just have one comment in that our daughter Tina was at, what was the name of your living group?
Steelhouse.
Steelhouse, yes, thank you. My senior moment here, Steelhouse. And she was going to have she lives in Canada, she was going to have a little reunion of some of her friends that lived in Steelhouse with her. And so my job was to photograph some items from the yearbooks that she and her friends were in and get those photos to her for her little reunion. Mm-hmm. But scrapbooks I meant. Sorry, I'm sorry, I said the wrong word. Scrapbooks. But the scrapbooks are full of photographs. And a lot of them are not, the individual people in them are not identified. But it would be a great thing if you could scan these. And other houses might have things like this as well.
Yeah.
And so if they would let you scan them, and then maybe as alums come back, they could help identify the people that are in the photos.
Absolutely.
One thing that you'll notice, we have an electronic newsletter called the Vandal Vibe that comes out every other week from the alumni office. And if we get those photos, we'll put them, we've had several, do you know who this is? And then they can call us or write us. And we've gotten some answers that way, Priscilla. Yeah.
But we do have, so we do instruction for classes on campus, very traditional, like a history class or, but outside that too. And we do have students who are just even in those classes alone who get very excited at the thought that, they're part of a certain fraternity or living situation. And we will have some of that represented through our archives. But I do think one challenge that I've learned about in the last few years is with some of the, and we have a very large Greek presence on this campus, but there are definitely some things around us collecting some of those materials, and a lot of those things they'd rather them be sending them to like their national organization and things. And so just trying to have some of those conversations, probably both with advisors and, you know, real adults as well as students, about how can we share that material. It doesn't mean it has to physically go live in one place and no one else can ever use it. And so, yeah, I think that that's definitely something that we're interested in doing more, partnering with students and trying to collect that information. And alums, too, who have, would have some of that other information that current students will have no idea. But even things like having the songbooks and things out at different events, students say, oh, we still sing all those songs, and it's not the fight song. And so it is interesting to see how things do carry on, even in places I wouldn't necessarily think that
One
would
of the
happen.
Actually, one of the most magical moments I've had in this position was last summer, and the women of Kappa Kappa Gamma had their reunion, and there were 600 Kappas who came to campus, and they were all seated in the Vandal ballroom. There were grandmothers and mothers and daughters and granddaughters in that room, generations who had been in the house. And we had a nice dinner, and there were speakers, and I thought the evening was over, and then all of a sudden, way in the back corner, the grandmothers started singing, and pretty soon every woman in that room sang their songs. So that tradition, and it was goosebump creating. It was really, really wonderful because that tradition was so, so deep. It was just amazing.
That's cool.
I brought gifts. So there are Tradition Keeper books on the table there. Please help yourselves. This lists some of the traditions we talked about tonight, but others as well. It's full of photographs. It was a book that was created for the 125th anniversary of the institution several years ago, but the traditions are just as relevant today, so please help yourself. There's also brochures there, and there's bookmarks with some current talking points about the institution if you're interested. Any other questions?
That some traditions are, in a sense, created by the university, and I'm not forced on the students, but made available to the students, and they continue it or adopt it as something of their own. And I have a suspicion that a lot of things, some of the traditions that have failed, that have gone by the wayside, is because of the lack of university support to keep it going.
Absolutely. There was no university funding for the streak team.
Not needed.
See, if they'd been smart, they just would have branded a bunch of stocking caps and given them to them.
But, so my question is, and it goes into this, dealing with the digital change, is how can the university find the resources to support and encourage these kinds of traditional things and make sure they get documented and go to the archives? Because the archives can't do it.
No.
But the university has university photographers. They should be taking these photos and turning them over to you.
Which they are.
They do.
Oh, they
Joe
are?
is awesome. Yes, in fact, we've started talking about their enormous digital photo archive that freaks us out, but it's so awesome at the same time that that'll probably be one of our next bigger challenges, because they're very good about depositing many, 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 many years of photography, both things that they've taken as well as, we opened up this closet in our building and found 4 more boxes of, and they're actually pretty good. They'll take some time to give us even some very, very basic information about, not at the individual photographic level, but, at a higher level. But I think you're right. I mean, this is the $1 million question right there. It's like, fund us, please, because this is what helps carry on traditions, too. It's not just people, but it's also documenting that over time. So,
Well, and the traditional means, there hasn't been a Gem of the Mountains, which is the yearbook, since
2004? Yeah, so
After that, people just didn't want to pay for it.
They didn't want to pay for it.
that's
With a magazine that comes out, I think it was.
The blot.
That's really, I think every university I've worked at, it's right around that same time. They all go away.
Because the blot is a fine magazine. It is no replacement for a yearbook, none. And it's really interesting when people come back to the university for their reunions, like the Golden Eye reunions or those who have graduated 50 or more years ago. They want to look at, we pull out their yearbooks years from the basement and make sure they're in the lounge, and, you know, they pore over them because they know, you know, they know different, to see different people and themselves in different settings. But we're going to reach a point where, you know, there won't be anything.
You know, and some of those photographs that we used for the presentation even, those came from the yearbooks, right? So we don't have, no one's given us that information yet. And so the Streaking Society is a good example of that. And some of the other photos too. So what happens when there's no yearbook to help, and I'm just picking on one publication, to help represent that? That's a really powerful research tool that we certainly use in our department, and I know people use all the time to help fill some of those gaps. And so now that doesn't even exist anymore. So
Here's something for you. You don't want to know this. Everybody's photo gets taken for their Vandal card.
Yes.
And so those could be somehow accumulated and made into like a digital yearbook. That is not a printed one for people to go through, but is something that, you know, maybe it could be put on a disc and sold to students for not a lot of money.
yeah, we've had a few students like be in classes and mention like, oh, it sucks that they don't have a yearbook anymore, you know, and have an interest in it. And then they said something about, well, we could just never print it. I'm like, why would you print it at this point? It'd probably be digital.
Just scan it and, yeah.
I mean, go for it. Go ask for the funds. I mean, I do think it's a very useful tool, and it's a great way for you to remember your experience. So maybe someone will come through and help think about what that would look like.
Because it's amazing, 50 years after you graduate, you forget a couple of things. And so the yearbook is this wonderful tool to go back and say, oh yeah, I have a new friend, Frank Fletcher. He's going to be 87 next year, and he is an alum. He wrote to me right after I wrote my first column, and we've been pen pals and friends ever since. But he came for a visit, and he was talking about his time on the boxing team. And he says, oh, but no one remembers that. I found the yearbook from 1937, I think it was. I found the photograph of him and his three other boxing team members, and I did a really cheap, easy photocopy of it and gave it to him, and it brought tears to his eyes. So those photographs are so important because it just transported him immediately back to where that time when he was young and fit, and he was, you know, they were just pounding the crap out of each other and winning rounds. So
plus they had an excellent team. You can see the trophies downstairs on the first floor. But yeah,
they had a good team. Yeah.
To me, this is an interesting topic about the future and this lament about the yearbooks, but it's a different time right now. And if you do a search on Instagram, there's a place for University of Idaho, and there are hundreds and thousands of pictures already there that are tagged University of Idaho. You go to, you do a hashtag University of Idaho or UIdaho. You can find these. You have access to more information. But the challenge is that, like 90% of them are selfies, but
which does say something.
It's important to document.
Yeah, but it's just, to me, it's like the opposite problem of there's too much information, and someone like Ashland's going to have to go through and figure out privacy, rights, and copyright.
Those are the things that
But it's just, to me, it's a different sort of problem about that you kind of got to know what you're searching for. And
I just think about, when current students, so the students of 2017, in 2067, when they come back to campus for their 50th anniversary, what will that be like? How will they share memories? Will they all pull out their phones and say, look at this? Or, I just don't know.
Because so much metadata is taken on your phone now, so you could actually pull a picture from, if they come back in 50 years, they could pull a picture from 2017 on, when whatever the Humble Fest was happening, or Post Malone was on campus, or
Right.
the Vandals won this, and they could pull all this stuff.
There'd only be a few pictures.
Yeah. But I mean, there's probably will be a time where all this stuff will create this amazing collage. I mean, we're not exactly there yet, but there's all this metadata that's now tagged to these photos, including who took them and what sort of camera. And we're not there about putting it into an archive, so it's accessible. And I mean, archives create meaning, right? And it's this meaning that helps these traditions, right? And so right now it's kind of just all out there. And what's the challenge is going to be how to pull these back in to say, okay, hey, these are the traditions. You know?
And it's that, but it's also dealing with, like, you know, if you look at our archives, there's not as much material in general from the 80s, 90s, 2000s in general, you know, because we're starting to get to the point where more people will start to turn that stuff over, you know, and we'll start to fill those gaps. So it's almost difficult to, like, focus too much time on the current when you're still trying to deal with even what's analog, you know, in the last 30 years. But it's a good point. It's a good point.
Anything else? Well, thank you for your time and attention. Like I
Thank you to
said,
the City of Moscow.
yes, and please help yourselves to the goodies.
Yeah.